Hello and welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Inka Vat. In less than 4 months, Taiwan will go to the polls for its next president, with Tsai Ing-wen stepping down after 2 terms. Billionaire businessman Terry Gou has finally thrown his hat in the ring as an independent candidate after failing to win the KMT ticket. With me to discuss this are Lai I-chung, president of Taiwan think tank, the Prospect Foundation, and Courtney Donovan-Smith, political analyst in Taiwan affairs. President Lai and Donovan, very warm welcome to the show today. President Lai, if I can come to you first. So Gou is, as we mentioned, a billionaire businessman. He made his billions manufacturing in China, selling to the US, especially Apple, has suggested Taiwan sign a peace deal with Beijing. What do you make of his peace agreement?
I think, first of all, he made his peace agreement during his visit to the Quemoy at the anniversary of the August 23rd. That is the 1958, the big gun shell on the Quemoy. He wanted to demonstrate that he's a person that can talk to both United States, as he demonstrated that he was able to talk to President Trump earlier, and also he can talk to the Chinese leadership, so that he's the one that can actually bridge both sides and make a peace. That's why he said the peace deal. But of course, people would like to ask him that how are you able to mitigate the risk issue that you have so much business in China? And his answer is that he would just quit his post from the board of the Foxconn. But that hasn't really stopped people from wondering that what is the Terry Gou his true intention. The peace deal that you want to have, according to all the history of the China, has a peace deal with others, but China violates almost every one of them. So how are we going to enforce that? And,
so you mean Hong Kong and Tibet?
And all those, including the Chinese, they have during the KMT-CCT civil war. So what are they going to enforce that without the United States? Because one of the preconditions for the peace deal to actually make it happen is you have to avoid from the so-called third party involvement, which means that the peace deal would just be basically between Taiwan and China.
Okay, Donovan, I mean, you've written before that, to Taiwanese, you say, if you want annexation by China, vote for Terry Gou. Why do you say that?
Well, okay, he's described Taiwan as prey on a wire, and he talked about how he said that if tensions would rise either on the United States side or on the Chinese side, that Taiwan would die a horrible death. Now, he, as you know, you mentioned Quemoy or Jinmen he set out a series of what he thought would be a viable peace agreement with the Chinese side. However, what he wants to do on the Taiwan side, and this sets him apart from the other candidates, is he wants to stop buying armaments from the United States. He says that this risks making Taiwan an ammunition dump. And that makes it more of a target for China. So essentially what he's saying is he wants to make Taiwan less defensible, and he wants to keep an equidistance between the United States and China. However,
or actually just shut the US out in terms of defense, as in what President Lai said.
Yes. Now, all of the other candidates do want to keep strong relations with the United States, but he wants to keep an equidistant relationship between China and the United States. But China's the one that's threatening Taiwan's existence, not the United States. Now, he also says that for national defense, he wants a robot army of 80,000 robots. He hasn't specified what kind of robots. But fundamentally, and I think this is what President Lai was getting to, is if you make an agreement, a peace agreement with China, they are going to demand something in terms to trade-off of sovereignty.
Absolutely, give and take.
Yes, they're going to take something of Taiwan's sovereignty before they're going to give anything at all as far as peace.
Okay, Taiwan needing to trade or give something over to China. Can you help us spell out, therefore, the stakes for both Taiwan and the rest of the world?
The issue is that as long as China stops sending the airplane and the ship to Taiwan, to the proximity of Taiwan, then there will be no war. So why the fact that the Taiwan we are the one have been threatened? We had to offer them a peace deal. That doesn't make any sense. But there's a big voices in Taiwan political spectrum advocated that we need to have a peace deal in order to make peace with China first. And the corollary of that is that we have to make compromise in terms of sovereignty or other things in order to make this peace deal to actually take place.
So they don't believe that these things can both be true. They think that they're mutually exclusive, the opposition parties, whereas the DPP's position.
The DP position is that we work on a peace deal, but in order to maintain peace, we have to have a very strong military and our strong defense, and we need to establish our diplomatic security network and altogether. And the most important thing is that what are we defending for? We're defending our way of life, our democracy. And that is the core issue, the core value. That just cannot be given away. And so that in peace deal with China, China definitely would demand Taiwan to have a less democracy, that people can only decide their things to a certain extent. And that's a total violation of the democratic principle.
Okay, just like in Hong Kong. And Donovan, so in terms of the polls recently, what are they saying is the impact of Go's entry on the other three candidates?
Well, what's interesting is initially when polling was being held, he was taking more support away from Taiwan People's Party, Ko-wen-ze. But recently, the most recent polling I've seen, when you compare the three-way race previously without Go in it and with him in it, he's now taking more away from the Kuomintang, or the KMT candidate, Hou Yu-ih. Now, I've compiled a weighted poll of polls.
Okay.
He is for Taiwan News, and he goes now at about 14+%. Depending on which poll you look at, he takes somewhere a little over or a little less than 1% from Lai I-chung. But now he's taking more, again, from Ho than he's taking away from Ke.
So in that 14% that you give to Go from your weighted average of the polls, tell us what the other candidates have. What percentage?
So Hou Yu-ih is at over 18%. Ko-wen-ze is over 21%. And Lai I-chung is over 33%.
Right.
But he's taking away noticeable support from both of them.
Okay.
He's also interestingly, he's also taking a lot of undecided and independent voters. Because when you compare the three-way race with the four-way race, the number of people in the four-way who are undecided does shrink. So and that's actually noticeable.
Okay, very interesting. President Lai, some people are actually saying that, Go's purpose is actually to form an opposition coalition to basically counter the DPP in the election. What do you think are the likelihood of such a coalition forming?
Well, all of them, not just about Terry Guo, but also Ko-wen-ze and Hou Yu-ih, all of them wanted to have the so-called pan-non-green coalition so that they can unseat the DPP party from the government. But the problem is that as long as they wanted to increase their seats in the legislative yuan, they will throw themselves into the presidential race in order to enhance the opportunity for their legislative candidate to win the elections. So that that structure itself will make the so-called the pan non-green coalitions to be very difficult. For example, KMT not only will push its presidential candidate, but also they have a very strong party machine to field their legislative candidates. And the Taiwan People's Party under the Ko-wen-ze, Ko-wen-ze wanted to put himself to be the kingmaker after the election, knowing that he probably won't be able to win the election by himself, but he definitely would like to push forward for all the candidates of the Taiwan People's Party to increase as many seats as possible. And so that in the post-election scenario, that in the LY compositions, the DPP probably will still be the biggest party, but will be short on the majority, and the KMT the second, and that will put the TPP as the kingmaker, whether they will ally with the DPP or ally with KMT. And that makes it the Ko-wen-ze almost impossible to retreat, to withdraw from the presidential race. Now with Terry Guo coming in, Terry Guo is just about the presidential candidate and not did not field any the era candidates. That makes everyone will have a target against him more easily because you are just only for the presidential election. But of course, Terry Gou also believed that a lot of people are unsatisfied with either the candidate of the Ko-Wen-je or the candidate of the Hou You-yi, so that people want him to be in the race, especially among the KMT. So that Terry Gou believed that by forcing himself into the race, he will be able to force some kind of the talk between those and make him to win something. I do not know whether Terry Gou has a real intention of that he definitely will be in the presidential race to win.
Donovan, so what do you believe is Gou's intention, and could they eventually, last minute possibly, come together to form a coalition?
Well, I completely agree with President Lai's analysis on this. The lovely terms that I love in Taiwan politics is the hens and the chicks. So, for example, if you take Ko-Wen-je from the Taiwan People's Party, as President Lai noted, he needs to stay in the race because of the amount of attention that a presidential candidate gets from the media, from the press, and that draws voters to the party. And I can expand on Dr. Lai's analysis by also pointing out that not only does he want to play, to use your term, kingmaker in the legislative yuan, in the legislature, because he does have a good chance at winning on the party list vote. His party doesn't have enough money or the resources at this point to win very many district elections. And this is an important detail that's normally forgotten, is that government subsidies are also allocated based on the vote on that party list. So he has to stay in the race to ensure that he get large subsidies for elections. So there's a very good chance he could get, based on previous voting patterns and their current polling, that they could get 150 to 200 million NT for the party, and that would really give them a solid boost toward competing with the KMT's budget of about 1.2 billion, and the DPP is about 700 million from 2022. So this gives them a big leg up in trying to compete with the two major parties.
Okay, so unlikely. I think you're both saying very unlikely to form any form of coalition. President Lai, let's move on to the candidates' cross-strait policy. Are these policies beginning to sound quite similar? I mean, the KMT had long talked about the two Ds, dialogue and defence, and they've added a third D for democracy. How do you interpret the differences between the three? I think
those are semantics, and basically they try to make themselves that they can appeal to the general public, so that a lot of them just in the first impression is that it all sounds very similar. But the devil's in the detail, especially the KMT believe that dialogue is so important. But how could you be sure that you can have a meaningful dialogue with China? And who is the one that to be blamed that the lack of dialogue between Taiwan and China? And it seems that the KMT believe that by holding on the so-called 92 consensus, they can build a meaningful dialogue with China. But then people will ask that, but Chinese definition of 92 consensus is so different from yours. So how could you be sure that China is willing to have a dialogue with you? And KMT has no answer for that. And the Ko-Wen-je, well, even our foreign guests, many of them privately, they complain that they do not know what Ko-Wen-je is talking about, because he can be zip-zapped and here and there, 100 degrees U-turns, and he seems does not care about anything. So that without the consistency, then the people cannot have a real judgment and measure about his cross-strait policy. And the
could you give an example of where he zigzagged?
This is trade pact.
Right.
I think is a big example.
So this was what kicked off the sunflower movement in 2014.
So basically, in 2014, there was the sunflower movement, which was led by civic groups, students, and so forth. And it was a groundswell of support because the Kuomintang, the KMT, tried to push through a services trade pact with China. And they tried to ram it through the legislature, and they had a majority at the time. And some activists actually stormed the legislature, and then they occupied it for a few weeks. And there hundreds of thousands of people came out into the streets in support.
And why were they so angry, Donovan? What was it that they were so worked up about?
Well, I think because if you take a look at the details of the pact, it would have essentially given the Chinese side access to broad swathes of the economy. It would have essentially allowed a targeted, if the Chinese Communist Party wanted to use a targeted approach, it could have hollowed out very key industries within Taiwan. And these are, a lot of them are important for national security. They would have been able to, for example, take over media outlets. And so they could have eventually, using advertising muscle or outright purchases, have been able to, for example, take over media in Taiwan.
And Kerr has publicly recently said he does not support this, but privately.
Okay, so here's the story. So in 2014, he came out in support of the Sunflower Movement. Now, it was leaked that they were working on a white paper in the Taiwan People's Party. And there were discussions of going ahead with the Services Pact. Now, when that was leaked, Ke went back and forth on, he was thinking about it, he was not thinking about it, and he was he kept shifting his positions. And weirdly, like, he would say one thing one day, and a spokesperson on the same day from the Taiwan People's Party would say a different thing. And they kept going back and forth, and there was, and then finally it kind of came down to, I think this is where they stand now. They want to pass a oversight bill for cross-strait relations, and then they'll think about maybe negotiating a new services treaty different from the one that was negotiated before. But we're not 100% sure that's where they stand right now. That seems to be where they stand right now.
Thank you, Donovan. Well, a former U.S. intelligence chief has said that China has made the strategic decision to, quote, go all in on Taiwan's presidential and legislative elections. Former CIA station chief in Asia, David Saar, said Beijing would do this through a, quote, combination of information warfare, military intimidation, political and economic manipulation to try to create divisions within Taiwan society, to hollow out Taiwan from within, creating chaos. And in the US, Microsoft recently identified a suspected Chinese state-backed influence campaign using artificial intelligence to target American political candidates ahead of the 2024 US elections. Microsoft said the campaign began using generative AI technology in about March 2023 to create politically charged content in English and mimic US voters. Donovan, we just heard about the Chinese-backed influence campaign, possibly in the US, to affect voters ahead of the US 2024 elections. Now, in Taiwan, what is China's goal? It appears to be getting, pro-China candidates voted in.
Yes, I mean, absolutely. That's part of it. I think that they have several different things that they want to accomplish. One is that I think they want to sow discord in Taiwan and undermine Taiwanese democracy. I think also they want to get pro-China candidates elected. Presumably that would be the KMT's candidate, Hou Yu.
Why not the others?
Well, Terry Go might actually be a candidate they might want to support, but I'm not sure they think he's trustworthy or reliable. It's hard to say at this point. They haven't said a lot in, I haven't seen much in the Chinese press yet talking about his candidacy, so I can't really speak to it.
And Ke?
I think they would prefer Hou Yu because he very specifically has said that he wants to follow the path of Ma Ying-jeou. And Ma Ying-jeou, he's very publicly and very obviously spoken with former President Ma, and he wants to follow in his path. And he doesn't. He's made it very, very clear that that's exactly what he wants to do. So, in that sense, the Chinese Communist Party then knows what they're dealing with, assuming that he does. The one difference I've noticed in his the way he speaks about certain issues is that the one difference between him and Ma is he does talk more about national defense. Ma I-chung rather famously,
cut back the budget.
The military spending dropped below 2% of GDP. Now, Ho has not said where he wants defense spending to be, but he's spoken frequently about having a strong national defense. And you mentioned the 2 or 3 Ds, depending on which part of the KMT you're talking to. But one of those, they have deterrence and dialogue were the first 2 Ds. So the deterrence there, which is a bit different than the Ma era.
President Lai, Taiwan has dealt with China's cognitive warfare for many decades, and it's held several elections since democratizing in 1996. But this, I think most people agree, this is a pivotal election. So what is Taiwan doing to prepare against, to protect against Chinese meddling?
Well, it's difficult to say because I think in last election, that's President Tsai versus Han Kuo-yu, year 2020. I think precisely due to the recognition of the year 2018, how Taiwan suffered from the Chinese disinformation warfare, so that the year 2019, there's a series of legislations, particularly try to address that the disinformation or election interference issues.
That was at the local election level in 2018.
Yeah. But there were the legislation proposed and passed trying to address the interference issues. And also, I think that there were the multinational cooperations between Taiwan, Australia, United States, for examples, to unfoil one possible the tactic by China on Taiwan about the election interference. So that, and of course, in addition to that, we have the Hong Kong issue that at that time, that a lot of people in Taiwan, they wake up and saw what's happening in Hong Kong. So that's how the election in year 2020, despite some effort by China, that it did not really work out. But this time, first of all, we are entering a total new terrain that is going to be a post-Tsai era in the Taiwan politics. And second, the kind of election interference by China on Taiwan, they took a very different tactic. For example, right now the generative AI started to be employed and possibly will be used on Taiwan. And second, China also employ a lot of the so-called internet celebrities, especially from Taiwan, as a commercial project for them to broadcast something. Some of them, they are the less politically inclined content, but they implicitly really attack the ruling party, or try to discriminate or disfranchise the people who are willing to work for the legitimate political issues. So that right now the tactic is basically about how the democratic system in Taiwan is so unworkable, is so untrustworthy, that even authoritarian system in China and the kind of the ruling method in China, that will be a viable alternative to the democratic system in Taiwan. So this sets up this one apart from what the election interference, what we observed in the past. This one more focused on the democratic system itself, not just about promoting a certain candidate or try to delegitimize a certain candidate.
So Donovan, if we can sort of try and join the dots here, then China is doing its utmost to try to, as you said, several things, but mostly to get the pro-China candidate, and you're saying it's Hou Yu-ih, voted in. They're also, as President Lai said, trying to offer autocracy as a viable, future for Taiwan. How do we help the public to see this clearly?
Well, there are several groups out there, notably, for example, Doublethink Labs, that are working on trying to combat disinformation. Now, the government has passed some laws, but they have to tread a very careful line, because Taiwan has transitioned from martial law to one-party state and then to a democratic system, protecting free speech really does matter, and people care about this very much. So, you know, the long-term goal that China has, you know, as we've talked about, is undermining democracy, presenting autocracy as an alternative, getting a more pro-China candidate elected. But ultimately, this is all being funneled into their long-term goal, which is to subvert Taiwan's sovereignty and eventually co-opt it and take Taiwan over. So fundamentally, what has to happen here in Taiwan is that people need to remain vigilant, and that's why groups like Doublethink Labs help so much. Now, for example, the Taiwan State Building Party, they're promoting the idea of passing laws that are more explicitly targeted at China-funded or China-influenced media operations. But the DPP is a little bit mixed on this, and the Kuomintang and the Taiwan People's Party are not for that. So at this point, I don't see a legal change happening anytime soon. So I think it's going to have to be up to the public and civil society groups to pick up the slack.
Okay. President Lai, give you the very final thoughts. If you can summarize in one sentence, what is it that Taiwanese will be voting for when they go to the polls in January?
They need to vote for democracy and the value that we inherited and we spent so much and cost so much for us to re-fight for. So that is the definite answer we have to go.
Okay, thank you so much, President Lai and Donovan, for joining Taiwan Talks today.